Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ethos Online, where we want to learn to be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So again, wherever you're joining from, we're so glad you're here. And again, if you are joining us for the first time, hit subscribe, hit that little bell, and every time we're live, it's going to give you a little signal. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We have been moving through this series, A New Way to Be Human. This is our third installation of this series. And so we are looking at the teachings of Jesus. Specifically, we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. And again, the Sermon on the Mount is such a beautiful, pivotal point in the New Testament. Because what it's doing is it's taking Jesus as this figure, this Jewish rabbi is taking him as a figure of the next Moses. He is what Israel looks like when it walks around in flesh. That's the deeper idea. A new way to be human has evolved and grown, and this is what Jewishness, Judaism looks like. In fact, it's bigger. It's what love looks like when it walks among us. So that is the bigger picture of Jesus. And so Jesus goes up on the mount. He begins sharing these new ways of viewing Torah. And again, just like Moses on top of the mountain, sharing this new message of how to be human, Jesus does the same. And again, living life harmoniously together. This is the idea of the law. It's a deeper critique on the heart of what it means to be human. So again, remembering the context, 70 AD is when Israel, the Jewish people, lose their temple. They go through a really painful experience again. The question is, how will we survive? How will we get through this? Who are we? What's our identity? Is Israel dead for good? Like, what will happen to our nation? And weren't we promised a new kingdom reality right here, right now? What happened to all those promises in the past? Were they just for our ancestors, or do we get to claim them too? Those are all the things going on there for Jesus and his people during the first century. And so again, Jesus becomes Moses 2.0, the law 2.0. So it starts again with blessings. And we talked last week how these blessings are all intricately involved with the Old Testament. We also talked about how the word blessings, it means happy is the person, right? The consequences that follow when you do good things, this is what they naturally look like. And so we looked at Deuteronomy 28, and we discussed how deeply connected, if you're a Jewish person and you hear blessings repeated, they immediately would have gone to Deuteronomy 28. And all of the different blessings given to Israel. If this happens to you, if you go through this, even though you're in pain and brokenness, these are the blessings Yahweh will give you. And so this is a very popular chapter during the first century. They're reading this. And so it's interesting that the first century writers, the gospel writers, would have Jesus sharing these same concepts, essentially taking from Deuteronomy, expanding on these blessings. And that's what they do. And so the very next blessing, right, after the one we looked at last week about not having a spiritual landscape, the next blessing in Deuteronomy is this one. It goes like this. Next blessing, the fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land and the young of your livestock, the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks. Now, this sounds weird, right? Most of us are not living in an agrarian culture anymore. Most of us are not like living season by season with our livestock and our crops, and we're not thinking crop rotation, all that stuff. That's just not the life we're living, right? We have grocery stores, and we're not dependent on the seasons anymore. We can get through winter, right? So for them, though, there's some really deep connected metaphor symbolism within this. So remember this first and foremost. Israel considers itself the firstborn, right? The firstborn. Israel sees themselves basically as the first nation to become awake to the divine. They felt like they were the first nation to be aware and to respond to the divine, which says also pretty interesting about Judaism. They also believe that other nations respond. They also just feel like theirs was one of the first. And so because they were the first, many blessings, twofold, double portions, right, are given to Israel because they responded, because they woke, right? I'm woke. That's the idea there. They woke up. They listened. And so Israel sees themselves as, again, that firstborn nation. Now, again, if you are in the first century and the nation of Israel seems to have experienced a death, what happens when the firstborn dies? Because that's the question they're asking. Again, when we read the blessings, none of this is going through our minds. We're not Jewish, and we're definitely not first century Jews. But for the first century Jewish person who would have been, whether you believe it was literal or metaphor or added in, whatever you believe about this, if you're sitting there and you're reading this, or you're sitting there at the feet of Jesus, this rabbi, sharing these ideas, you think immediately when you hear this blessing, you are connecting it to your own people, your own nation, the firstborn that has experienced death. You've connected it immediately. And this is why Jesus will say this in verse 4. He'll say, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Again, direct connection to Deuteronomy 28. And there's also this beautiful verse in Isaiah. Again, a very popular one, big surprise during the first century after the death, right? The brokenness, the temple destroyed, 70 AD. Here it is. It's Isaiah 66, 10 through 13. It reads like this: "Be happy for Israel and rejoice with her, all you who love her. Share in her great joy, all you who have mourned over her." So again, understand Isaiah's talking about, Isaiah's the scribe. He's writing down the words of Hezekiah, who's describing the nations around them falling into brokenness, and the nation of Israel hurting and in pain and experiencing death. And he says, "For you will nurse from her satisfying breasts and be nourished. You will feed with joy from her milk-filled breasts. For this is what Yahweh says, look, I am ready to extend to her prosperity that will flow like a river." It goes on and on. These are the abundant blessings, the things that will come to you. I know you're in mourning, but we're going to move through it. Because here's the thing. Jesus is doing something really interesting here. He's reminding them that mourning, being sad, being in the brokenness, it's a process. For Americans today, a funeral, when we think of I'm going to a funeral, it's an event. And for most of us, a funeral is a one-day event, right? We're terrified of death in our culture. We want to put someone in the ground, and we want to move on. We want to get it. We want to get it as quickly away from us as possible, because death is a reminder that we're all going to experience death at some point in our lives, and we don't love that in America, do we? And worldwide, we don't like the idea. Often, most cultures are terrified of death. Yet in Hebrew culture, death is not an event. Death is a whole process. And it's a process that you actually learn to lean into. And so let me share with you, for a Hebrew, again, a Jewish person, they actually go through a mourning process. So again, you and I, typically when someone dies, we go to the funeral. We might say some nice things about them, and then we go home. And if we weren't that close, we kind of just move on. If we are close to them, people do all sorts of things. Some people will go to therapy, or some people will start to remove the clothes, slowly out of the house, or the belongings, maybe put them in boxes and attics, whatever. We do certain things, but there's not really a process. But for the Jewish people, there's an actual process they go through when they go through mourning. And so the first process is called Inuit. And this is basically a period from death, so when the person dies, to the burial. And so during this process, they are essentially in deep, deep mourning. It's the wound just took place. It's painful. And so there's weeping, there's crying. People are beginning to come together for this. They're beginning to come together around the family. This is like the minute it happens until the burial. This is the first phase. And in this phase, it is normal and it's right to be able to let go of those emotions. It's normal to weep and to be sad. And again, in our culture, we like to put those emotions aside. And unfortunately, we don't leave space for those things to ever get out. And so for the Jewish person, it's so important to allow those emotions to just feel raw, to let those emotions out from the very beginning, the first phase of this mourning process. The next phase is Shiva. And again, if you remember back to the story of Job, his friends all come around him. He's experiencing loss, brokenness. They're supposed to sit Shiva with him. They're supposed to sit. They would put, sackcloth and they'd throw ashes on themselves. They would sit in solidarity with someone. They were supposed to, at least, right? Instead, they curse God and die. Not so good advice. Not sitting Shiva, right? But they're supposed to sit there for the first 7 days of mourning. So think about that. When a friend of yours experiences a deep loss, or a family member, it's typically a family member. But when that happens, as a Jewish person, then you are supposed to go to them and sit in the pain with them. Not offering a bunch of advice, not giving a bunch of Hallmark cards, not giving trivialities of, God's giving you a test or whatever, that garbage. No, you just sit with them. You sit in the pain for 7 days. The concept 7, completion. You sit in solidarity with them. You sit in the mourning with them. You don't ignore it. You sit with them. Yeah. The next one, Shiloshim. This is the first 30 days now. So now you're looking past 7, right? And again, for us, this is like, wait, what? Like, the funeral's over. Get over it. No, for them, now you look at the 30 days, the next 30 days. This is where, again, beginning with the day of burial on to the 30 days, this is a complete mourning period. This is more for all of the people except for the parent or the spouse, right? This is the time where the community takes time, 30 days of mourning. So again, think about that. If like there's a kid in your neighborhood and he got hit by a car, like tragic maybe, your community right now, they probably don't know much about it. If that were to happen, or maybe they'd show up at your doorstep and say sorry or those kind of things. But here's what a Jewish community would have done. They would have come together, all been a part of it, sit Shiva, and then for 30 days, the whole community mourns with you. That's heavy. And that's a beautiful moment to say, you're not alone. There is a group of people who love you, support you, and are with you. 30 days of mourning is the process. The next one is Yud Bet Kodosh. And this one is like the 12 Hebrew months, basically. It's all these months following the day of death. And so this is the mourning period for the parent. So again, you take the entire year, right? For many people, they won't work. They take a year to mourn. What does that look like a year, right? For many of us, we'd be like, what? Like work gives me like 2 weeks, No, you have a whole year. And your community continues supporting you. They're bringing you food. They're bringing you help financially. They're doing all of those things for you. And for that whole year, you are ensuring that you move through the mourning process. You go through the painful moments. You go through all the stuff, right? It takes a long time to mourn. And mourning is a process you don't ever stop, really, if we're going to be honest. But they take a whole year, again, for the parent or the spouse, the one close. You take a whole year to do that. We're so far from healthy in our culture, aren't we? Next one is Yarzit. And this is where every year there's an anniversary date, every single year after, where you take time to remember the person who died. You take time to bring their memory back. You think of the good, the bad, the ugly. You celebrate the life that was lived. And you remember them. You don't forget. Because the truth is, we don't forget. And we can try to push off, but that's unhealthy. For them, they take time to remember, to celebrate the life that was lived. And that is a deep, deep process of mourning. And so when Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. He's saying we as a people in this first century who are broken, right? Again, the stories of Jesus, they're not written down until 70 AD, well past the crucifixion of Jesus, right? Again, way past that date. These stories come up, they're written to remind these people we need to lean in right now. Don't freak out, don't run away, don't lose all hope. Lean in, and we lean in together in this process. And when we lean in, watch this, when we lean in, there's comfort. But there's no comfort if there's no mourning. There's no comfort if we're not leaning in. There's no comfort if there's not community. There's no comfort if there's not process and connection. There's no comfort. And so for an Israelite, for a Jewish person, the idea here that Jesus is reminding them, again, who have experienced the death of their nation, what he's telling them is lean into the pain. Lean into the pain. Don't escape from it, lean in. And when you lean into the pain, when you move through process like that, you see the divine everywhere, right? You see the divine holding those who are hurting and broken, crying. You see the spouse holding the other after the death of a child. You see these moments together where the divine shows up in community, in love and support and connection. And this is where Jesus says we have to mourn. We have to mourn the loss, just like the ancients did, right? Deuteronomy 28, Isaiah 66, we have to learn to mourn first, because once we mourn, we can be comforted. Beautiful. Yeah. And so we are comforted when we allow ourselves to mourn. We are comforted when we allow ourselves to mourn. So the question, of course, is how do we do this? Always, right? How do we do this? How do I apply this to my life right now? I think we've answered a lot of that already, but here's some that Nancy Stordahl, she's a grief therapist, and she gives a couple steps of learning how to step into grief and loss. And so I thought I would share those with you right now, because maybe it's not a literal death. Maybe some of us have experienced the death of a certain ideology. Right? We're feeling lonely. Maybe we've stepped away from a relationship, right? Or whatever the thing is, we've experienced deep loss, death, whatever it is. Grief comes in many forms. And so whatever grief you're experiencing, whatever loss you're experiencing, there needs to be process. And so watch this. The first one she says is this, and I think it's so powerful. It takes time. It takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight and wow, I feel better. No, that's medication. And that's not good. Grief, loss, it takes time to move through. She says, don't expect to be ready for the natural order of things. You won't be. Grieving takes time. Grieving takes time. Next thing she says is take your time. Because everyone, again, you can read all the books imaginable about everyone else's experience, and that can be helpful. But at the end of the day, it's you. It's your experience, and it's your time. And so she says, never let anyone belittle this loss, make you feel guilty for grieving too deeply, or hurry you through the grief. You are entitled to feel all the grief's intricacies and all the grief's intensities. Again, take your time. Your time. Your time. And again, I've experienced this as I stepped away from a certain dogma and a certain religious structure. I had to learn to take my time. And some were patient and some weren't, and that's okay. That's okay. Another thing is learn to be kind to yourself. I love this quote. Be kind today to yourself. Remember to be a good friend to yourself. Accept that you're doing your best. Love perfect imperfections. Be mindful of what you need and give it to yourself, and surround yourself with people who honor, love, and cherish who you are. Grieving, again, like all grief, it can be exhausting, she says. Be kind to yourself. Eat well. Take time to yourself, sleep well, do things that are going to help you. Take care of yourself. Another one she says is grief is never over. Again, we want to take the pill and it be over. We want to, this is the answer, this is the formula, and I'm done. But the thing about grief that we know over and over again that we've experienced is it's never quite over, is it? Because there will always be moments where things remind us of the loss. Again, whether it's a relationship, a death, the leaving of a certain system, whatever it is, there's certain things that will always come up. Grieving is never over. She says, grief does not end. Rather, grief comes and goes. Then it comes again. When it comes again, accept it. Learn to celebrate the life lived and sit in the mourning as you need. It's okay. The last one I think is just so beautiful. Celebrate. Take time to remember and then celebrate the person's life. Or if it was a job, relationship ending, or leaving a tribe, take time to celebrate the life that it led you to. Take time to celebrate where I am here and now. This life that the whole thing led to. I can be grateful. Think about that. Grief, when I learn to sit in the mourning, it can actually lead me to a place where I can feel like I can celebrate and be fully present and alive and thankful for the life it led me to. Powerful. So again, in the words of Jesus, we're going to turn the 21st century, right? We are comforted when we allow ourselves to mourn. And so wherever you are right now, my hope is that you would learn to lean into the pain. Don't avoid it. Step into the mourning, know it's a process, and know that in the end, when you lean into the mourning, when you have community present, when you allow them to sit with you, when you allow them to spend time with you in the grieving, you will experience life. You will be comforted. Beautiful, right? Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, this was part of our series, A New Way to Be Human, looking at the Sermon on the Mount in a fuller, more historically accurate way. And so I hope you enjoyed this. And as always, please consider giving. Your donations really do help us continue this. It takes a lot to do this. The lights, the cameras, having our technician videoing this whole thing. It takes a lot. And so please consider giving to www.ethos-church.org/donate. That is a tax-deductible gift that you can give us, especially now during the holidays. We love and appreciate your support. And if you are wanting to be part of a community of people who want to ask questions, maybe you're in the middle of it and you're saying, I don't know what I think anymore. Wouldn't it be helpful to have a group of people you could talk to? I think so. And so every first and third of the month, we offer this thing online that's a live interactive feed where you can join people from all over and you can talk about what all of these concepts of faith and doubt and reconstruction, deconstruction, we do all of it together. And if you want to be a part of that, email me. Email me at tonywerfel@gmail.com, and I'd be so glad to respond to you. And as always, subscribe, and share these as often as you can. Everyone, we love you, and we're so thankful you joined us today. Take care, and join us next week as we continue to delve into these teachings of the Sermon on the Mount. Bye, everybody.